Day 1289 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,086,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 810 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 2 tanks, 2 APVs, 50 artillery, plus 1 rocket launcher and another air defense system, as the SOF struck a S-400 Triumph SAM division in the Kaluga region. But further reports coming in hot, with 2 further radars reported damaged or destroyed in Crimea. And it's all happening right as Ukraine goes full siege right now, that is to say, suppression of enemy air defenses, allowing Ukraine to prep the stage for what's looking to become an AFU fall campaign of their latest strike weapon platform deployments, including Neptune missiles, Flamingo missiles, ERAM missiles, and doing so alongside their assortment of hybrid drone missile platforms that include the Peklo and the Palancia. But let's not forget the ramp up in the production of their successful varieties of their more traditional drones, like those of the AN-196 long endurance 1000 kilometer ranged drone, and their heavily ramped up FP-1 turbojet drones, where both account for Ukraine's most successful long-range drones in this war to date. There is also the expectation of a Ukrainian fielded ballistic missile by Christmas time, where that could either be the FP-7 Little Boy or the FP-9 Fat Man, coming from the producers of the Flamingo, noting that I just borrowed those nicknames from 1945 at the end of World War II. So this strike platform list goes on and on, with the capacity to compromise military assets on Russian territory only growing. But now to the map, with what has already been compromised overnight, with more drone sanctions on oil refineries, as Ryazan's 17 million ton per annum oil refinery taking the latest hit in the early hours of the morning, as Ukraine hammered the country's 3rd largest fuel plant, and for the 3rd time this year. The attack, carried out by the Zalo UAV unit of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, along with coordination from the Special Operations Forces and military intelligence, struck the AVT-6 processing line, a unit that handles more than 6 million tons of oil products annually. Simply put, these are bottleneck assets. Disabling even one cuts a meaningful percentage of Russia's refining flows. Fires and explosions could be seen as they ripped through the site, and where local officials claimed air defenses brought down 8 drones, but only to claim unspecified industrial facilities were damaged. But the images tell their own story. A more accurate one, that Russia's 3rd largest refinery was burning yet again. Also noting, Ryazan's refinery is rather centrally located, such that it feeds both the capital to the north and directly supporting military consumption in the south. For Moscow, the math is brutal. 5% of the country's refining capacity sits in Ryazan, and when even a single unit goes offline, supplies tighten for both civilians and the military. At this rate, Russia's not going to have a refined oils export industry in the future, unless of course they come to the peace negotiating table meaningfully. Then on the Russian map, and briefly to the Lipetsk region, where the Energia plant was attacked again, a site that produces specialized power systems for Russia's guided fab munitions, missiles, and drones. Then next, and to occupied Luhansk, as Ukrainian kamikaze drones continued to strike hard overnight, setting ablaze one of the last remaining oil depots in the region and destroying a Russian combat supplies warehouse. The blast triggered secondary ammunition detonations that rumbled for more than 2 hours, leaving plumes of thick black smoke and fire visible across the night sky. According to Ukrainian sources, the Atesh partisan movement and an underground local network directed the strike attack onto the depot, which had been supplying Russia's 41st and 20th CAAs, or Combined Arms Armies, operating in this region, which accounts for almost 20% of all Russia's CAAs. So with this site now burning, one of the key sustainment hubs feeding Moscow's forces in eastern Ukraine has been taken off the map. The timing compounds an existing crisis. Luhansk was already running dry on gasoline, with most fuel only moving through on trucks, easy prey for drones. The loss of this depot deepens the shortage, effectively pushing the region toward a fuel scarcity zone. Now, unfortunately for Russia, it looks like another case of mishandled OPSEC, as Ukrainian-linked channels had boasted just earlier in the day that the stores were full. Then, by nightfall, Ukrainian military intelligence turned that claim on its head, thanking them for the coordinates before striking the very tanks they had boasted of. On the destruction of the site, it's examples just like these and others that prevent Russian forces from the opportunity of mounting successful breakthrough after breakthrough as part of their offensives headed west further into Ukraine. And now, one of the most popular Russian Telegram war bloggers, Two Majors, enters a bit of panic mode right as Ukraine continues to destroy the energy and logistics base of Putin's war machine, with Two Majors calling the situation for what it is, but I recommend they exercise caution with their words, because to admit Ukraine is successfully targeting transport hubs and energy facilities suggests a failure in Russian defenses, which in turn is skirting dangerously close to criticism against the Russian army, which can land a Russian in jail, or as they call it in Russia, the front-line trenches. Now to the unoccupied Donbass region, deep into the Donetsk bunny ears, with a firm southward push by the AFU on the eastern side of what was once bunny ears, or even a dog thumbs up, with their forces smashing into Volodymyrivka and pushing beyond. And that's important because also simultaneous operations of the AFU are continuing to unfold on the western side of the Canine's legs, with this Russian pocket now less than 6 kilometers wide, with only a single country road still open for them, with that tenuous corridor looking more like a liability than an asset, and risks being severed if Ukrainian advances continue pinching in from both sides, with Ukrainian fighters that struck enemy positions near Zatishok in this Dobrapilla direction, capturing 9 occupiers. So it's a location that is fast becoming an extremely fluid front, putting precise frontline details to remain under clarification, but the trend line is emerging. Pressure mounting against the Russian forces on multiple vectors of attack, with the Russian footholds increasingly reduced to narrow, vulnerable strips of land. Then to head next door as Pokrovsk holds, and it's a case of Russian intentions being put on display, because over the last 3 weeks, up to 40% of all Russian airstrikes on frontline positions have been entirely within this sector. Now, specifically from Pokrovsk to Konstantinivka. And just to put that into even better context, you zoom out of the map and you could almost say that half of all airstrikes have been acutely focused onto this one position on the map. Now, I used to say, judge Moscow by its actions, not its words, and the expression holds true for here as well, indicating that this is clearly Russia's goal zone, the sector where it hopes to force the outcome. Then looking around the map, because somewhere in the east, much farther east in fact, following reports of Russia launching a salvo of air-launched cruise missiles, but where problems emerged, as 2 nights ago, Russia's bomber fleet suffered an embarrassing setback during the major raid, reason being, and as per Russian aviation circles, one Russian Tu-160, the supersonic Blackjack strategic bomber, failed to drop release its missiles, another Tu-160 was struck by lightning, and a third was separately grounded, potentially coming from maintenance issues. And so the reality check for the Russian Tu-160 bombers is that they are thin on the ground. Russia currently operates roughly 13 Tu-160s, so even if everything swings perfectly, they're still a highly capped commodity. And take for instance, modernization is slow and makeshift. 4 of those are still being upgraded in 2025, but they're built from Soviet-era unfinished airframes. Nothing new in sight, and where modernizing just one Tu-160M is a Herculean task. About 18 months of labor and coordination between 10 different industrial enterprises. So for these latest setbacks, all comes after a multitude of reports that Russia's tiny Tu-160 fleet has been flown far beyond its limits, overused, under-maintained, and slowly falling apart. So when even a lightning strike or a failed missile drop cripples a major raid, it's less about bad luck and more about strategic bomber force rotting under the weight of its own exhaustion. Moscow is demilitarizing themselves in so many sectors of their military. They just don't know it yet. Then to the news, with European leaders gathering at the Élysée Palace in Paris for a high-stakes Coalition of the Willing summit, co-chaired by French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The meeting brought together representatives from 33 countries, with 7 European leaders attending in person and about 20 others stretching from Canada to Australia joining remotely. President Volodymyr Zelensky was at the event in person as expected, underscoring Ukraine's central role. The agenda was blunt: to finalize post-war security guarantees for Ukraine. Leaders endorsed a framework in the creation of a multinational reassurance force, with 26 countries pledging contributions in troops, training, and equipment. The idea is not to deploy at front lines, but to establish land, sea, and air positions in strategic areas meant to deter Moscow from testing Europe's resolve once the fighting subsides. France and the UK pushed hardest for this framework, while Germany preferred weapons over troop commitments, and countries like Hungary and Slovakia stayed away altogether. But alongside troop commitments, the coalition agreed to deliver long-range missiles and to expand sanctions aimed at Russia's oil and gas revenues. The European line was clear, maintaining pressure on Moscow while insulating Ukraine from future coercion. Washington sent Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, who stayed briefly before departing, as European leaders used the Paris gathering to nudge the US toward firmer guarantees. But it was Europe, particularly France, Britain, and the Nordics, that carried the momentum. Zelensky welcomed the pledges, emphasizing Ukraine's sovereign right to invite foreign forces. Now, following all of this, Russia responded with predictable fury, warning that any Western troop presence would make them legitimate targets and be considered a threat to Russia, being a reaction that highlights why the coalition insists on deterrence as the cornerstone of a future security order. Now, speaking of responses, Zelensky replied to Putin's call to come to Moscow for talks. In his response, quote, "The American side told me Putin wants me to come to Moscow for talks. If you want the meeting to not happen, invite me to Moscow," end quote. And that would be about right. A surefire way to never ever see him again. Now, as for Paris events, until now, the COTW, or the Coalition of the Willing summits, produced scattered pledges, a batch of missiles here, another training mission there, but Paris has changed that. For the first time, 26 nations signed onto a single reassurance force status, a stand-in framework for land, sea, and air deployments, explicitly built as post-war security architecture. So it was more than just aid, it was Europe putting steel and structure around Ukraine's and Europe's future, signaling that Europe is stepping up to take the leading role as Washington's lead subsides. Now to a small rapid-fire Russian economy news segment to round out the video. So starting out, Russia's own economic development minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, has gone on record admitting the country has reached the point where growth is over. The baseline forecast is being revised down again, with stagnation arriving earlier than even Moscow planners expected. His words echo earlier warnings from June and August, when forecasts were slashed and recession loomed. But this latest admission signals an internal recognition that the engine has stalled. Meanwhile, the private sector is already sounding the alarms. Alexander Shevelev, CEO of Severstal, Russia's largest steelmaker, says the crisis now unfolding rivals the collapse of the 1990s in Russia. The numbers back him up. Severstal's net profit is down 50% 25% in the first half of 2025, and not expected to get any better in the second half, with the company reporting a negative cash flow of 29 billion rubles, forcing it to suspend dividends for a third straight quarter. But then to the household front, mortgage stress is surging in Russia, with the volume of loans overdue by more than 90 days has hit a record 157 billion rubles, up 114% year on year, and now equal to 0.8% of the Russian bank's mortgage books. Now that may sound small, but mortgage ratios above 2 to 3% are considered red flag zones. And the overdues here have doubled in just over the space of a year. And just look at that line chart. The most recent months to the right, which is a warning of a curve that starts to look exponential, not linear, with monthly jumps accelerating, each month greater than the last. Even more alarming, independent reports say banks are masking the true scale of the defaults, which could make the picture far, far worse. Forget a recession, which Russia will officially tip into in the coming quarters, staved off until now because of defense spending, but what's coming for Russia is a full-blown depression. It's gonna be a tough one. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers! The American side told me Putin wants to come